also verticalizing their industry, meaning they control every step of the way, and that being very attractive to potential acquirers.
Today's podcast is sponsored by SynBioBeta. If you're a Grow Everything listener, you know that biology is the most important technology of the century. You also know that we're huge fans of the SynBioBeta conference. I've been attending since 2014, and it's my favorite conference of the year. There's no faster way to get up to speed on synthetic biology and its impact across industries. This year, we're going to be joined by inventor Dean Kamen, futurist legend Peter Diamandis, and Brian Johnson, among many others. SynBioBeta is where biology meets opportunities. So I hope you'll join us in San Jose, May 5th through May 8th to see how biology is transforming every industry. To get $400 off, use the promo code GROWEVERYTHING when you register at synbiobeta.com. I hope to see you there.
Yeah, I mean, the verticalizing is very interesting. Can you share an example? Was it verticalized from day one, or did it become verticalized? Did they create a value chain with other partners just to get an MVP up, then started verticalizing? Talk to us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, the company that I'm thinking about that really controlled this process is K18 Hair. And we've had Saveen Sahib, the co-founder, on the podcast last year, and we should have him on again to talk about how things have progressed. But K18 stands out because they controlled everything. And then over time, they controlled their distribution because they went out direct to their customers, which was at first stylists. But then eventually they were showing up in places like Sephora and Ulta Beauty, which increased their distribution. But on the manufacturing side, to this day, they control everything. They've got a manufacturing plant that designs the molecules with them. They've got formulators. And like I said, we should have Saveen come back on to really talk about what advantage verticalizing and controlling their ecosystem has really given them.
K18's orchestration really happened on the marketing side. The manufacturing side, they verticalized, but on the marketing side, it was an amazing orchestration of different stakeholders. K18 brought together stylists, salons, retail buyers, beauty influencers to have a very strong message about biotech and beauty. That's why we love them. Because they didn't hide the biotech. They put it front and center, but they really thought about who are all the players and how do we get them involved? How do we show up where they are? And how do we bring them all together to talk about biotech and beauty? And yes, of course, K18 went through, but they weren't just talking about their product. They were talking about hair science, which we helped them in the beginning with the science communication. So it was such a great example of marketing orchestration. But we are very interested in manufacturing orchestration because you see the challenges of the transition from depending on petrochemical use in producing goods and being able to use biology to produce goods. So what is the challenge or what's missing? And what we're seeing it's missing is that there needs to be this concept of value chain syndication of commercial orchestration. And we're using this word, I know orchestration is used a lot in AI as well to talk about some back-end stuff. So if you're an AI person and you're like, why are they talking about orchestration? We're borrowing that word to talk about orchestrating manufacturing across different players, starting from an innovator all the way to the big incumbents, whether that's CPG or pharma or whoever has the distribution to the end consumer. How do we think about that? And how do founders think about that? How do other people think about that? And it's really taking a step back away from the one company, the one thing you do every day, and looking at all the players. And I think for us, it's been easier to think about, I think, because we work across various companies. We talk to so many different amazing people, whether they're investors or founders or scientists and across different stages. And we start seeing this. And so we're like, okay, let us be your mirror to where you fall in a value chain.
Yeah, and what's interesting is when you look at the people that we talk to holistically, it becomes very clear for certain innovators where they need the help. It could be on the biomanufacturing side. It could be on the investment side. It could be developing the relationships with the stakeholders at a bigger company. Like you mentioned, red dye being banned. So there is this scramble for all these big companies that use dyes to find alternatives. Well, we're very lucky in that we know a number of companies that are producing dyes, biological dyes, alternatives to petrochemical dyes. And their challenges are all different kinds of challenges. Again, it's like some are scaling, some need scaling help, some don't have manufacturing in place, some just need to get exposure to the bigger companies that are going to end up buying their products. And along the way, they have the opportunity to start developing those relationships. A lot of times that's with a small deal. What does that deal look like when you're a small company? And you did this when you did your startup. You have a small deal. And actually, it happens on the MessagingLab side too. We'll work with a big company and they just want to see, can we trust these people? They talk a good game. Will they produce for us? How does it work? And we've introduced a number of companies to big players. What does that small deal look like?
Yeah. So we call these seed deals. So it's not seed funding for you to use, but these are seed deals. And I know some people might think, all right, are you talking about piloting? Is that one way of it? Again, this is not about that. This is not about piloting. It's about thinking that, all right, the big shift that we need to do, we need to create tons of ingredients to go into multiple tons of product. So talking about that, talking about the big picture and say, this is how we will make the shift. Then you scale it down to a seed deal. Look, all right, let's create a strategic deal that fits within the budget and risk tolerance of a mid-level decision maker. Let's just get started now. But we know we're going to be working towards this big deal. It's going to grow into something bigger. So this isn't just about revenue. This is about relationship architecture. So try before you buy, what you're talking about. And it's relationship architecture across the value chain. So you talked about red dye is one that we come back to because we just see that there's this great opportunity. Let's talk about red dye and food. So there's multiple steps in the value chain because you have the innovator who's making it. And we know a lot of great companies that are doing it. Then you have the people that are making the product. And sometimes that's not the people that are selling the product because when we're thinking about red dye and food, so red dye 40 is in Fruit Loops and Fruit Loops is owned by Kellogg. Well, we don't know Kellogg very well, so we don't know what their infrastructure is. So we're just going to use a hypothetical situation based on other CPG, big food companies that we know. And we don't want to put Kellogg under fire. They already are under fire.
For the use of red dye,
yes. So sorry. But the person that's producing this cereal is working with multiple vendors to source the sugar, to source the corn or wheat, or I don't know what the basis of Fruit Loops are anymore. I used to love that cereal. And then manufacturers to make the actual Fruit Loop. The point is there's multiple people. How do you, as an innovator, look at all those pieces and then go to Kellogg and say, hey, look, I know that this is how it's manufactured. I already talked to these people and I know they need to make the transition to use my product. And my product, my biological red dye, can be plug and play. And we can do this small deal. We can just do a limited edition and focus on the Brooklyn market first, please. And we're just going to do a limited run. Everyone signed up. So we've done the lift. All you have to do is say yes. So that's a full orchestration, but we're saying like, hey, look, we can do the change. Everyone's on board. We're going to start small. It's within your budget and risk tolerance because we're saying a limited run. Let's do this. And if they say no, then there's another issue.
Yeah. And what this does is big companies tend to be very conservative and they tend to be risk tolerant. And yet, on the other hand, they want to be innovative. So they're always looking for innovative solutions. And doing the smaller deal really de-risks the bigger commitment that they're going to have to make down the road. Innovators need to put themselves in the shoes of the big company that is, on the one hand, risk intolerant, but then on the other hand, hungry for innovation. When you get the seed deal, you have to be able to execute flawlessly to make sure that you deliver what you promised. But at the same time, you also need to do ecosystem marketing, which is you're surrounding the people that are involved in this deal, however many they are, with the air cover that's going to help you continue to sell this as you go up the value chain.
So, Karl, how does one actually architect an ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean, this is something we do every day, Erum. You and I talk about it. We live and breathe this. We spend time introducing founders to each other so that if a founder of a company needs help, for example, with biomanufacturing, we can introduce them to people on the biomanufacturing side. If they need help or strategy to develop products that are just going to plug and play into existing ecosystems, we can help find that out. And we've also been very successful at getting startups in front of really big companies, not for pitches, because no one really wants to be pitched, but to really co-design future supply chains. And that's where these days, today, being able to look at a supply chain, localize it, regionalize it, make it something that is much more robust. This came out of COVID where people realized how fragile supply chains are. But Erum, what do you think this feels like? This is different than normal business development. What does it feel like to you when we're putting these people together?
Yeah, and we're creating a basketball team. you know, we have to have all these players that are working together to get a shot in the basket. I don't watch a lot of basketball, so a shot through the hoop, or I don't know.
It is
a slam dunk, you want to get them. Yeah, there we go. That's a better one. Getting a basketball team so they have a slam dunk and replacing red 40. Who is going to, okay, I'm going to stop with the basketball references.
But keep it real.
Yes. But, it's bringing people together, creating a team of companies that excel in a part of this. Supply chain's one word. We also use supply networks because it makes it seem like, okay, it's pretty linear.
It's linear.
It's not. Sometimes it's not. If you're creating a cereal, you're going to have multiple ingredients coming from different places, and maybe an ingredient has to be processed a couple more times before it gets to you to actually manufacture. And maybe if you're Kellogg, you're not going to even see any of this if you have vendors that actually make it for you. So it's bringing all these people together and creating that team. So we're all working together. So how do you architect that team? That's what you're just talking about. And it's to be able to sketch it out. Who do you need to talk to? And having that core mission of saying, we're going to replace Red 40. And here's everyone that is involved in producing, processing, using, integrating, selling, testing, eating Red Dye 40. Then you start your ecosystem marketing because you have that message, that mission, and you have the thing. You have all the players. Again, in our view, we know the players. So to be able to say, this is the mission, let's get everyone in the room and play and do this. This is what I think is the beauty of being able to talk about and share the concept of ecosystem architecture, orchestration. We'll come up with one word, but we're Messaging Lab. We have lots of messages to share.
I think it's also just worth pointing out that this really requires founders to think differently. I know that my habit is to think about things in terms of business development and how do you move a deal forward with one person. I'm trained as a traditional salesperson. I had to learn how to sell. But this really is something that many founders are going to have to learn as a new skill set. They have to become their own advocates and deal architects. They're not trained for it because they're usually laser focused on their company, but they should understand that if you're selling B2B and you've got something that a bigger company is potentially going to want, then you really do have to have this ecosystem built. And you become the backbone or the center of this. And we recently had Veronica Breckenridge on the podcast. She's an example of this because they're bringing different people, different players to the table to provide a vision and also resources when it comes to scaling up biomanufacturing and putting innovators together with chemical engineers and biochemical engineers to make it easier to scale up. And I think it's going to be really interesting to watch how First Byte and BioWell do this level of orchestration because it's the same thing that we've been talking about. And we're looking forward to doing it with them as well.
Yeah. And I'll also mention, First Byte is a venture fund and BioWell is an accelerator. And they're very unique. I think they are doing what founders assume that VCs and accelerator do, but oftentimes they don't do this level of creating deals for the founders in their portfolio or helping to do this. At least we know hundreds of investors and only a handful of them that we know of actually help founders create the deal, not just make an introduction. VCs for sure make lots of introductions, and that is hugely valuable. But then to sit at the table when a deal is being crafted, it would be great to see VCs do that more. But again, VCs want speed. They're doing their own thing. They have their own mandates. And maybe if they have a big portfolio, they can't pick favorites and do these things. So it'd be cool to know if there are VCs out there that have a business development arm for their portfolio companies. And if you are that VC or know a fund that does that, please let us know. It'd be cool to talk to them and be like, okay, so how do you help your portfolio companies create deals across an ecosystem? Maybe niche ones do. I don't know, like if there's niche VCs that are like, all right, we are focused on developing biochemicals, and that is what First Byte and BioWell do. So you're welcome, First Byte and BioWell. We talk about you all the time because we love you guys. So why are we talking about orchestration right now, Karl? Why did we felt compelled to create this special episode before we go to SynBioBeta, where we're going to meet all different types of players? But why this moment? What's going on in the world?
Yeah, so politically and economically, we're moving towards a much more decentralized economy, which really allows biomanufacturing to shine. Biomanufacturing is seen as critical infrastructure. The Department of Defense sees it that way. This report that just came out from the National Commission on Emerging Biotech sees it that way. National security and supply chain resilience aren't just buzzwords. They are really becoming budget lines. It's something that people are talking about. And we've got tailwinds for this. They're geopolitical. You've got the tariffs. They're economic. People want to be able to buy things that are not crazy expensive. And from a climate point of view, we want to stop shipping things around the world. And there's a continued increase in bio-based innovation. So the demand for bio-based innovation continues to increase, but it's not going to translate to adoption unless there's a lot of things in place, including this idea of orchestrating not just deals, but orchestrating ecosystems. But Erum, we're talking about this and we see the downsides of it too. What are the risks? Where do people fail at this and why?
Yeah, I mean, the risk is it doesn't get done. The risk is the deal doesn't get done and everything falls apart and you're just not able to move your company forward and the innovation doesn't get into the hands of the people. So really, some of the challenges are going to be about messaging, of course. We talked about, again, we're using this example of red dye 40. It's a very clear problem. You're not saying, oh, I do enzyme engineering, we create novel molecules, and we have this algorithm that does X, Y, and Z. No, you're saying, we're going to use all those things to change, to make a very specific change. And we're going to change Fruit Loops.
I think the other one is seeing legislation that comes down from the EU where they're banning microplastics. That's a huge deal because there's all sorts of ingredients that clothe, materials, sheds, plastics, and microbeads, for example, are typically made of plastic. The EU is legislating that you can no longer use microplastic beads in your products. So there are companies that we know very well, shout out to our friends at BioAg, who are developing these bio-based alternatives to microbeads. So there's a lot of opportunity, but that again is going to require this orchestration, not just among the end buyers, but even with users. Another risk is that innovators have to move on relatively fast timelines. You have a limited amount of money. You've got to move as quickly as you can. So you're looking for deals that are going to allow you to stay in business longer. And building these ecosystems isn't like a 12-month exercise. It could be a 5 to 10-year arc. That's a lot of time for a startup, especially when you've got investors breathing down your neck because they want an exit.
If you really want to win at this, is that you have the ecosystem and orchestration in place before you raise money. So that way you just have funding to fuel the idea. That would be the wonderful
That's
thing.
a dream.
That's a dream.
Yeah.
But you also have to manage expectations. And there's a whole nother conversation about, is venture capital the right type of money to be used for the shift in the bioeconomy? You talked about the private capital that's needed, or if we're talking about large cereal companies and they need to change their food dyes, they need to replace Red 40. How long will it take? So you have to manage expectations across the board. And you talk about the 5 to 10 year arc and you say, hey, look, this isn't going to happen in a year. So let's get started now. But the reward outweighs the risks here when it comes to ecosystem building.
For sure.
Right. And there's just so much opportunity. We talked about red dye 40. We talked about microplastics, but there are so many ingredients that need to replace as we learn the effects that they're having on the human body, on the environment. There's a lot of orchestration that needs to happen. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, you're totally right, Erum. We hear people talking about biopolymers, packaging. We've had a number of people to come on and talk about packaging. We've talked about biosurfactants, biopolymers, coatings for clothing, ingredients that most people never think about that need to be replaced because, as you said, they're not healthy for humans. They're not healthy for the environment. Oh, and palm oil. Palm oil is a big one. And we had Shara Tiku of C16 on the podcast very early on, but we've had other people talk about palm oil replacements because it is such a ubiquitous ingredient. So there are so many opportunities for innovators working on these ingredients to create these ecosystems and supply the big companies that are using these ingredients every day.
Well said. Well said. So as we wrap up this episode, a special episode talking about value chain syndication, orchestration, ecosystem building, what are some final reflections, Karl?
Like I said earlier, it's not about sales. It's bigger than sales. Sales is a part of this, and it's not about marketing. Marketing is a part of this. It's really about creating, as you said, ecosystems is about architecting these things. If you want to lead a category, you can start doing this today by putting the people together. This is something that is needed. When we tell founders to do this every day, they should be putting people together, bringing different points of view together, and building the ecosystem themselves. And if they don't do it, that's something that we can help with.
Right. Yep. That's amazing. You got to get the founders aligned with the incumbents, with the vendors, with investors. I mean, we definitely need to do a whole episode on different types of financing because investment is not the only way. And there are other exciting ways. We have friends in finance that have been sharing some very interesting ways to fund these types of activities, to fund projects that are commercial in nature. So we love talking about this. If you're thinking about how you can get your innovation into the hands of the people, or if you're at a large company and you're looking at how do we bring innovation in, how do we get our vendors aligned, how do we get our supply chain networks together, talk to us. I mean, another thing too is that it's easy for us because we're not a part of those companies. We know that it's easier said than done for a founder to do something like this because you have your company and your singular focus on the company. But to be able to step out is challenging. You can do it, but talk to us. We have the 30,000 foot view about what's going on in the bioeconomy, who's doing what, who needs what are different governments doing, what's coming around the corner. So let's talk. We enjoy talking about it clearly. We just did a whole episode about it. And yeah, we hope to see you at SynBioBeta.
Yeah, let's talk.
Yeah, you know how to get to us. Everything is in the show notes. Just click on the episode and you're going to see our contact information. You'd be surprised. People do reach out to us and we do reply and engage, and we love you guys. So thank you for listening to the Grow Everything podcast.
We will talk to you soon. That's the pod.